I wasn't expecting trouble the night I camped beside my own lake. I'd been craving silence, a break from the noise of everything. Work, neighbors, responsibilities. So I dragged my old canvas tent down the hill, set it up by the water, and let the soft glow of my lantern settle over the shore. It felt peaceful, until I noticed the shadows moving where they shouldn't have been. I wasn't alone, and I could feel it long before I heard the footsteps. At first, I thought it was just a late-night walker or maybe a curious animal. But when the flashlights cut through the trees and voices whispered my name, a cold shiver ran down my back. The HOA. Not just any HOA, my HOA, the group that claimed to protect community standards, but acted more like they owned every inch of land around the lake. They stepped out of the dark like they'd been waiting for me to make a mistake. And apparently, camping on my own lakefront property was enough for them to call the cops. I still remember the officer asking me, "Sir, do you live here?" The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. I'd built half the walking trail around that lake. I planted trees the HOA now bragged about maintaining. But as they circled me, shining lights in my face, I realized this wasn't about camping. It wasn't about rules or regulations. It was about control. About something they didn't want me near. The lake had always felt like a quiet escape, but that night, it became the center of something darker. Something hidden beneath the surface. Things the HOA never wanted anyone to discover. And the more they tried to push me away, the more it felt like they were hiding a secret bigger than a simple complaint. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. But as I packed up my tent under the glare of their flashlights, I made a silent promise to myself. If they wanted me gone from my own land, then I needed to find out why. What were they protecting? What were they afraid I'd see? Hours later, as I stood alone on the empty shoreline, I spotted something floating near the reeds. Something the HOA didn't know I'd found. Something that changed the entire story. And that's the moment everything began to unravel. I waded a little closer to the water, the cold brushing against my ankles as I reached for the thing drifting near the reeds. It was just a corner of something at first soft, worn, and almost colorless under the moonlight. When I lifted it from the lake, water streamed off the edges, revealing a laminated card. A badge. Not recent, not clean, but official enough to make my chest tighten. It didn't belong to me, and it definitely didn't belong in my lake. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening to the crickets and the quiet ripple of the water, trying to steady my breathing. My mind kept going back to the HOA's behavior earlier, the urgency, the intensity, the way they acted like the lake was off-limits even to the person who owned part of it. It hadn't always been like this. When I first moved into the community 5 years earlier, the HOA had been strict but predictable. They cared about lawns, fences, and parking. Annoying, sure, but manageable. But about a year ago, something changed. Meetings became private. Emails from them grew shorter, colder. And any conversation about the lake, repairs, access, even simple fishing was shut down immediately. I chalked it up to typical HOA power tripping, until tonight. Holding that badge in my hand, I felt a shift inside me, a tightening, a realization that this wasn't just about camping or rules. It was personal, and it wasn't the first time they'd targeted me either. I thought back to last summer when Emma, my neighbor and the only person who ever stood up to the HOA, mentioned seeing strange trucks near the lake late at night. No logos, no markings. Just headlights, then darkness. She joked that the HOA must be running some underground side business. But I could hear the worry in her voice. 2 weeks later, she moved away without a word. Her house sold within days. Now, with this badge dripping lake water onto my palm, I wondered if she'd known something she couldn't say out loud. The night air felt heavier as I slipped the badge into my pocket. Every rustle in the trees suddenly felt like a warning. Every wave against the dock like a ticking clock. The question pressing hardest on my mind wasn't who the badge belonged to, but why the HOA had been so desperate to keep me away from this exact spot. And before sunrise, I'd learned something they never wanted revealed. By the time I got back home, the badge felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my pocket. I kept touching it, almost checking whether it was real or just something my mind had invented out of anger toward the HOA. But every time my fingers brushed the cold laminate, the same uneasy question returned. What was this doing in my lake? Sleep didn't come easily. I kept replaying the night, the harsh flashlights, the urgency in the HOA president's voice, the officers' strangely rehearsed questions. It felt coordinated, like they knew exactly where I'd set up my tent. And that bothered me more than anything. The next morning, I walked over to check on my neighbor Sam, who'd quietly taken over Emma's old house. Sam was the quiet type, kept mostly to himself, but he'd been the one person who warned me, half-jokingly, to stay away from HOA business unless you want trouble. When he opened the door, his expression shifted instantly the moment he saw me. Not surprise, concern. "You were down at the lake last night, weren't you?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. I hesitated. "How did you?" He stepped outside and shut the door behind him. "They were watching you. They watch everyone now." That was the first time I realized this wasn't just my problem. Sam's eyes darted around like even the trees had ears. He told me that over the past year, anyone who questioned the HOA vanished from meetings, conversations, even neighborhood barbecues. Not gone, just quieter, distant, like they'd been warned. A moral dilemma started forming in my mind. I could stay silent, pretend nothing strange was happening, and keep the peace. Or I could push deeper and risk becoming another one of those people who suddenly stopped showing up. And honestly, I wasn't sure which path scared me more. Sam eventually leaned closer. "If something washed up in that lake, they'll come looking." His voice was barely above a whisper. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one the HOA monitored. They had a system, a network, maybe even people inside the community keeping track of who went where. And somewhere in that twisted structure was the truth behind the badge. On my way home, I noticed a black SUV parked near the trail leading to the lake. Windows tinted, engine running, no driver visible. It wasn't watching the lake anymore. It was watching me. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Every creak of the old floorboards, every rustle outside the window made my heart jump. I kept picturing the black SUV parked near the trail, engine idling, like a predator waiting for the right moment. I knew the HOA had eyes everywhere. I wasn't just trespassing on land anymore. I was trespassing on secrets they would kill to protect. By midnight, I grabbed my flashlight and my jacket. I had to know. I had to see if the badge led to something bigger. Quietly, I made my way down the path to the lake. Shadows stretched across the water. The moon reflected off the ripples, silver and mocking. I kept my steps slow, careful, scanning the treeline. Halfway there, I froze. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. My heart skipped. Not a human figure. A boat. Small. Almost invisible. And in it, a stack of crates. My flashlight caught a flash of metal. Another badge? Papers? Couldn't tell. Then I heard the voice. Low. Authoritative. Commanding. Not directed at me, but something about it made me tense. I crouched behind a tree, peeking through the branches. The crates were being unloaded, moved to a hidden dock I'd never seen before. Two more figures joined the first. Faces obscured by shadows. Their gestures sharp, hurried. My pulse raced. I should leave. I knew it. Every instinct screamed danger. But curiosity, anger, something darker, kept me rooted. The badge. The HOA's obsession with my presence. This had to be connected. A sudden sound. A twig snapping underfoot. One of the figures turned sharply. For a heartbeat, our eyes would have met if he'd looked my way. He didn't, but I froze, chest tight, breath shallow. Every second felt like an hour. Then my phone vibrated. A message. From an unknown number. Asterisk, leave now or it won't end quietly. Asterisk, I swallowed hard, heart hammering. My hand went to the pocket with the badge. Cold metal against my palm. I glanced back at the trees. The SUV wasn't there anymore. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It never left. And then, in the distance, a single light flickered from the dock. Too deliberate to be random. Someone knew I was here. Someone wanted to see what I'd do next. I realized, in that moment, there was no turning back. The secret was almost within reach. But reaching it might cost everything. I stayed crouched behind the tree, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the dock. The crates were open now. Papers, old ledgers, and more badges, stacked neatly, almost ceremoniously. Whoever these people were, they weren't just hiding something. They were organizing it, cataloging it like a secret they didn't want anyone to touch. Then it hit me. One of the figures stepped forward. And the face I hadn't expected to see was Sam. My quiet neighbor, the one who had warned me about the HOA, the one who had acted like he was helping me. His expression was calm, calculated. The trust one had put in him slammed against the hard truth. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly, but the words weren't a warning. They were disappointment, betrayal. Before I could react, another figure appeared, Emma. She had been gone, disappeared from the neighborhood months ago. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, I thought relief would wash over me. But no, there was a sharpness there, a message in her gaze. "You shouldn't be here either." I staggered backward, tripping over a root, my flashlight spinning wildly. Shadows danced across the water, reflecting off Sam's face, then Emma's. The dock seemed smaller, more sinister. "Everything you think you know about the HOA? It's wrong," Sam said. "They're just a front, a distraction. What's in these crates, what you found in the lake, changes everything." The papers fluttered in the night breeze, whispers of secrets I wasn't ready to hear. The badges, the ledgers, they weren't just about controlling property or rules. They were about people tracking, manipulating. Names I recognized, neighbors I trusted. Emma stepped closer, voice urgent. "If you take one step forward, you'll see how deep it goes. And there's no going back." I froze. The lake, the dock, the crate-filled shadows. It wasn't just about me or my camping spot anymore. I had stumbled into something bigger than I could imagine. Every choice I'd made, every trust I'd given now felt like a trap. And then, as I glanced toward the tree-line, I saw headlights piercing the darkness. Not the SUV this time. Multiple cars. Authorities? Or another layer of the HOA's manipulation. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just fighting for truth anymore. I was fighting for survival, for clarity, for the chance to expose a web I had no idea was being spun around me. And in that instant, the peaceful lake I once loved had turned into the center of a storm I couldn't escape. The next move could change everything. I took a deep breath, letting the cold night air fill my lungs, and stepped forward. Every instinct screamed to run, but I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything I'd uncovered. Sam and Emma watched me, expressions unreadable, as if the dock itself was holding its breath. I grabbed one of the ledgers from the crate. The papers were brittle, pages worn, filled with names, dates, transactions, proof of the HOA's real operation. Not just rules or regulations, but a network controlling property sales, hidden land deals, and surveillance on residents. Every complaint, every violation, every tense meeting over the years, it was all part of a system designed to intimidate anyone who got too close. Emma stepped aside silently, leaving a path to the boat. Sam's gaze lingered on me, and for a moment, I thought I saw hesitation. Then he nodded. "You do this right. No one survives the fallout," he murmured. I knew what I had to do. I pulled the ledgers and badges into the boat, pushing off the dock with deliberate force. The water rippled, reflecting the moon and the fear and adrenaline in my veins. Behind me, the figures on the dock didn't move. They weren't stopping me. Maybe they trusted that I wouldn't go further, or maybe they underestimated me. By the time I reached the far end of the lake, I had a plan. I could expose the files, the network, every deceit the HOA had hidden. But as I looked back at the dock, a final revelation hit me. The badge I had found in the lake wasn't just symbolic. It belonged to Sam. All along, he had been part of the system, orchestrating the intimidation. But something changed when I arrived. He had chosen to let me see it, to make a choice of his own. I realized the final twist wasn't the files or the surveillance or even the betrayal. It was the people I thought I knew. They were capable of change, capable of fear, capable of letting go of control when confronted with truth. I drove the boat to the far shore and lit a signal, alerting authorities and media without directly revealing myself yet. The ledgers would surface. The HOA's deception would crumble. As the sun began to rise, the lake shimmered golden. Quiet returned, but it was different now, heavier, charged with revelation. I had survived. I had uncovered the secret. And then, in the very last reflection on the water, I noticed something impossible. A second badge floating near the reeds. Different from Sam's. New. Waiting. The story wasn't over. Not yet. By the time the authorities and reporters arrived at the lake, the truth had already begun to unfold. The ledgers, badges, and hidden records I had retrieved revealed a system of control the HOA had built over years, intimidation, surveillance, and manipulation disguised as community standards. What had started as a simple dispute over camping turned into exposing a web of secrets that touched every corner of the neighborhood. Sam and Emma both faced choices they hadn't imagined possible. Sam, once complicit, now had to confront his own role in the deception. His quiet gaze that night on the dock had been the first sign of his shift, from loyalty to fear, to finally allowing the truth to surface. Emma, who had vanished months ago, re-emerged not just as a witness, but as a guide through the maze of betrayal, helping authorities and residents understand the magnitude of what had been hidden. Neighbors came forward too, recounting subtle pressures, meetings that suddenly disappeared, and unexplained warnings. The pieces of the puzzle that had seemed disconnected for years were now forming a chilling but clear picture. And with each revelation, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The lake, once a sanctuary, had become a battlefield of truth and deception. Standing by the shore as the sun rose, I looked across the water. It was peaceful again but different, aware, knowing, wiser. The badge I had found that night, and the one that surfaced at the climax, reminded me that secrets always leave traces. Some are meant to control, some to warn, and some to guide us toward choices we didn't think we could make. I realized that my fight wasn't just about proving my right to camp by the lake. It was about courage, about questioning authority when it hides behind rules, about understanding that sometimes exposing the truth requires confronting those you thought were allies, and discovering that even people who have lost their way can change. The lake reflected the morning light like a mirror, calm and steady. I knew this story would ripple through the community for years, teaching a lesson I hadn't expected. Vigilance matters. Integrity matters. And silence can be more dangerous than confrontation. As I stepped away from the water, I remembered the words I had whispered to myself that first night. Asterisk, if they want to control the lake, they'll never control the truth. Asterisk, the HOA was gone. But the lesson remained. And now it was time to share it with the world, because some stories, once uncovered, refused to stay hidden. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the journey, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next story.